U.S. Army veteran, our next guest attended the University of Colorado using his GI Bill benefits. He continued serving in the Army Reserve, Marine Corps, and Marine Reserves. He was elected to the United States House of Representatives in 2008. He is the only veteran in the Colorado delegation and the only member of Congress to have served in both the Gulf War and the later war in Iraq. He is the chairman of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee on the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Congressman Mike Coffman.
Well, thank you so much. I was Army and the Marine Corps, so there were some folks that would say I go both ways. But it is such an honor to be here today at the 97th National Convention for the American Legion. And as a member of the American Legion in Colorado for over 20 years, I want to do a shout out to all my Colorado veterans that are here for this convention. I come from a military family. My father was a World War II veteran, my late father a World War II veteran and a Korean War veteran, a member of the greatest generation, fought in the Army Infantry. And as a young boy growing up, I wanted nothing more to be a soldier like my father and follow in his footsteps, although I thought it wasn't something I'd do for a career, it was something that I would do for a little while. When I was in my junior year of high school, I had convinced my parents by the end of that school year to sign for me so that I could join the United States Army. And at 17, it required the approval of your parents. And my father told me one thing. He said, you know, if you're going to go in for the Army, you really need to sign up for 3 years or more and not for 2 years. Because if you're 2 years, you're going to be unassigned. And they're going to put you in the infantry. And my father was wounded in combat in the Korean War and then was transferred to the Army Medical Corps, where he spent the second half of his career as an X-ray technician, retiring as an Army Master Sergeant. And so I said, Dad, I talked to the recruiter. He told me that I could serve for 2 years unassigned and I would not have to be in the Army Infantry. So I served for the next 2 years in the United States Army Infantry. I completed high school through an Army program, earned a diploma, went to the University of Colorado under the GI Bill. Before I graduated, I had continued serving in the military through the Army Reserve program. And then before I graduated, I went to see my father with a bigger, glossier brochure about the Marine Corps Officers Program. And my father said, the Marines is all they have is infantry. And I said, no, Dad. And I ticked off all the jobs listed in the brochure: intelligence, logistics, supply, aviation. And of course, I became an infantry officer in the United States Marine Corps. Having served my 3 years active duty commitment, I decided that I was going to continue, I was going to finish. I'd just done 10 years now, total combined. I was going to finish my career up, my 20-year career in the Marine Corps Reserves. I was going to come home to Colorado and take my leadership skills from the United States Marine Corps as an officer and apply it into business. And I was going to have a leadership position in business and management. And so I just remember going business to business to business. And they all gave me the same response. They said, thank you so much for your service. But, we just don't think there's a place here for you, given your skill set. And my resume had Army Infantry, no business degree, Marine Corps Infantry, and in Marine Corps Infantry, it was infantry officer specializing in amphibious warfare. And so I finally figured, hey, what if I change my resume just a little bit? And instead of putting down I was an infantry officer specializing in amphibious warfare if I put down that I was involved in international real estate, specializing in the acquisition of beachfront property. And, that didn't work. But as a 27-year-old, I was able to take my savings from being an officer in the Marine Corps and put it down on a small business idea where I learned how to balance a budget, meet a payroll, run an organization efficiently enough to make a profit, qualities not readily found in Washington, D.C. But let me tell you this, as hard as it was for me, it's much harder for most of the young men and women trying to return to civilian life from the military, because they're not officers, they're junior enlisted. And oftentimes they have families, and they don't have all those options. And so I think it's very important that we utilize the post-9/11 GI Bill, that we expand the job training in terms of on-the-job training and apprenticeship training programs available where they can utilize their GI Bill to cover their living expenses. Let's put our returning veterans back to work in job training programs that pay a living wage and give our veterans the job skills that will provide them with a pathway to achieving the American dream. When I was a young soldier, it was never a good thing when you had to report to the first sergeant. And so I remember as an Army private having some kind of a problem. I can't remember what it was, but it was significant enough where I went to my squad leader, my platoon sergeant, and now to the first sergeant. And so I remember reporting into his office. And I began telling him what my problem was. And I got kind of midway through, and I remember he had an angry look on his face, and he slammed his fist into his gray metal desk. And he said, "Soldier, we don't have problems in this Army. We only have situations. And some situations just happen to be worse than others. So, soldier, what's your situation?" And so I stood there, and I tried to figure out what he wanted. And then I finally figured out he did not want me to use the word problem. He wanted me to use the word situations, because in his mind that he thought that if you used the word situation instead of problem, that you were more optimistic about overcoming the challenges before you. And so I want to say today that I think we all know that we have some very serious situations when it comes to the Department of Veterans Affairs. Those responsible for the leadership failures within the VA must be held accountable, and the whistleblowers who have the courage to step forward must be protected. The VA has mismanaged its hospital construction projects. In April of 2013, a GAO report said, even at that time, that each of the 4 major hospital construction projects that the VA had, each of them were hundreds of millions of dollars over budget, years behind schedule. And the one in Colorado is even worse now. The Veterans Administration is a health care provider and a benefits provider to the men and women who have served this country and earned those benefits. It is not a construction management entity. The Army Corps of Engineers is a construction management entity. They have built similar projects for the Department of Defense on schedule, within budget. That is their core competency. The VA must be stripped of its construction management authority, and that authority must be transferred to the Army Corps of Engineers. The VA has had a very significant scandal involving the fraudulent manipulation of appointment wait times that excluded veterans from care in order for VA personnel to get cash bonuses. One of the solutions has been the Choice Act. But the Choice Act must be made accessible in a way that veterans don't feel isolated and on their own. They must feel a part of the Veterans Administration. And I think it's important to reform that program to make sure that it works for our veterans in a way that, again, they don't feel isolated. The VA needs to change their health model and make it more accessible for women with the appropriate providers in the healthcare system to serve the needs of our women veterans, who are now 20% of all recruits throughout our military are now women. And yet the VA system, the healthcare system, does not reflect that. It must change to reflect the modern reality of women serving in our military. Vietnam, a war that I never served in, yet had a great impact on me as a young person. My father's last assignment was in Fitzsimmons Army Medical Center in the mid-1960s in Aurora, Colorado. It became the center for amputees coming home from Vietnam. Soldiers wounded by mines and booby traps fighting in the jungles of Vietnam. And as the 60s progressed, the casualties became larger and larger. I can remember in the late 1960s riding my bicycle onto this small Army hospital post. And the soldiers wore blue pajamas. And they would come out to catch the morning sun in their wheelchairs and mostly amputees again, and it would be a sea of blue as I was riding my bicycle in. In the summer of '69, I had a bicycle wreck, and I needed to get my knee stitched up. And my father, the retired Army Master Sergeant then, took me to the orthopedic ward of the hospital. And when that elevator door opened up into that floor, I remember there were soldiers in wheelchairs and gurneys who had very serious wounds that were going to be moved about the hospital to be worked on. And I felt so embarrassed as a 14-year-old with this superficial wound in my knee as I began to navigate my way between these wheelchairs and gurneys among soldiers who had sacrificed so much for this country. I volunteered after that experience with the Junior Red Cross. And we did things to make the lives of these wounded soldiers a little bit better. We did book drives, and we did some watermelon parties in the summer and things like that. But I just remember the morale of those soldiers was so low that they were isolated from the outside communities. Nobody came and visited them but their immediate families. That as the American people became more divided in their support for the war in Vietnam, they also became more divided in their support for those who fought in that war. And as a result, those who fought in Vietnam were never truly welcome home. We must never do that again to any veteran returning from war to this country. Never again, never again. I feel as if I've come full circle, and now as a member of the Armed Services Committee, a member of the Veterans Committee, I often go and visit our wounded who are at the Joint Services Facility now at Bethesda. It is a hospital where our wounded are brought to. Once they're stabilized in theater, often come through Germany and then come through there first. Before they're moved, some do the rehabilitation there, others move on. I can remember, well, first of all, the casualty rate is very low now, thank God for that. But I can remember after the surge of Afghanistan, visiting our wounded, There was a wounded corporal who had a double amputee above his knees and lost part of his hand, who had just come in, and I went to visit him. And after I visited him, a doctor came up to me and said, "Could you see, Congressman, would you visit the rest of the wounded, please? It would mean a lot to them." And so what had happened in Afghanistan is that we got better in surveillance of the roadways where the Taliban were planting IEDs to destroy our armored vehicles, and we had up-armored our vehicles. We had better equipment in terms of roadway surveillance detection. And so it just became, they changed their tactics. And instead they used the same explosives to make anti-personnel IEDs for dismounted troops. And so we got a lot of amputees, but very serious amputees. Some double amputees above the knees so high up that no prosthetics would work to help them. There was literally nothing to work with, all the way up to their hips. And the corpsman accompanied me room to room, and I always ask him before I went in, I don't want to look shocked when I look a soldier or a Marine or an airman sailor in the eye. And I said, "What is it?" And he said, and it was the same in every room, bilateral amputation above the knees. And it was room to room. And in the last room, there were 2 Army airborne soldiers. And they got hit hard. And double amputees above the knees, both of them, balancing themselves in a wheelchair, clearly in pain. And one looked up to me. And without hesitation, he didn't complain about why him, didn't take pity on himself, didn't say, why did I become a soldier, why infantry, why Afghanistan? He looked up to me and in a confident way said, we live for one thing, and that is to be well enough when the soldiers from our unit in Afghanistan come home that we can meet them when they get off the plane. How incredible. How incredible is that? So long as there are Americans like those 2 soldiers, our country will remain strong. The American Legion will never forget the sacrifices of those 2 soldiers, along with all the soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen who have made tremendous sacrifices in defense of our country. The American Legion works hard every day to make sure that this nation honors its obligations to those who have fought for our country long after they come home. As a former soldier, a Marine Corps combat veteran, and as a member of the American Legion, I'm proud to stand with you today on behalf of all of our veterans who have served this great nation. God bless you, God bless the American Legion, and God bless this great nation.